Even if I have to after this.
Are these both the same? Are they both the same, or what's
Ooh,
going on?
smell that mango.
Many of you know that I've been rather obsessed with fermenting food over the last 2 years. Just been trying to take in as much information as possible, learn the basics, and spread that wealth to you guys. So when I'm walking through a bookstore and I see a book called The Fermented Man, of course I'm gonna pick that thing up. And it's about a guy named Delinger. Well, he wrote the book, he's the author, and he wrote about his year of only eating fermented food. Super interesting stuff, but what really caught me about that book was the chapter on beer making. I really never thought I was gonna make beer, but the guy's talking about how rewarding it is, and I could relate because I had just really taken a liking to sourdough bread, which is one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in the kitchen. So this guy was very convincing, and that really pushed me over the edge. I said, I gotta do this. So it turns out Derek is actually the brewmaster at a microbrewery about 3 hours from my house. So I contacted him looking for that little jump start to get me into the brew game, and he obliged. So I headed up to Kent, Connecticut, midwinter, to really get a taste of what brewing is like. Derek started his brewing, like many of us, as avid home brewers. He had a blog that was really popular, and then he got this job as the head brewmaster at a microbrewery, which is pretty cool because it turns out American brew culture and beer culture is the fastest growing beer culture in the world, mainly because there's so many avid home brewers out there. So these people are taking their skills to the next level. They're opening up microbreweries and they're spreading their craft, which is incredible. Maybe you guys will be the next to open that microbrewery. Who knows? So when I hung out at Kent Falls Brewery for the day, I was learning pretty much all the operations of a classic microbrewery. Everything from milling the grains, to mashing, to boiling, to adding the hops. I even learned how they creatively name their beers. And of course, we had to do an extensive taste test. Derek also sent me home with about 12 different styles of beers, so it was pretty exciting for the next few weeks in my apartment as I indulged and learned about all the different styles of beer flavorings. One of my biggest takeaways from Kent Falls, other than of course learning how to make beer, was learning about the extensive variety of beers that you can make. There's really endless opportunities when it comes to brewing beer because you've got so many different variables. You've got the grain type, you've got the types of hops, you've got the different strains of yeast, you've got the additional flavorings you can add, you've got the fermenting temperatures. There are so many options out there, and I think that's why beer making is spreading so much, because people are really just starting to get the taste of it. At least over in America, people are opening up to all of these varieties, getting away from those stupid light beers, reinventing the beer culture. So of course, when it comes to making beer, you gotta get your equipment. So I took another little field trip over to a local place in Brooklyn called Bitter and Esther's, and I talked to the owner, John, and he gave me the rundown on beginner's equipment. And this place is awesome because not only do they have beer making classes, but you can pick out custom recipes from Bitter and Esther's, and then you can weigh out your grains. You can also just pick extracts if you want that. And when it comes to the actual brewing kits, of course they have a ton of different options at all price points. I actually ended up going with the cheapest option, which is basically 2 converted 5-gallon buckets. And it also comes with everything else you need to brew and bottle the beer. Other than the glass beer bottles themselves, you have to order those separately. My favorite are those little pop tops that you can get on Amazon. Those things are reusable and they work great. The full kit cost me a little over $100, and you can buy a similar kit online. Amazon has a great one. I'm actually gonna be giving one away, so click in the description for the details on that contest so you can start brewing immediately. Once you have your beer making equipment, you've got to get your beer making ingredients, and there's 2 main categories of ingredients that you're going to be dealing with. One is all grains, which I'm gonna be showing you how to do, which is actually taking the grains, cracking the grains, putting them through a mashing process, which releases all of the sugars in those grains so you can convert those sugars to alcohol. That is the more difficult process, but I really enjoy it because you're doing it from scratch. I like the entire process. If you want to skip a few hours on brew day, if you don't have the entire day to actually brew beer, you can just pick up an extract, which completely takes out the mashing process. It's basically the extracted form of what we do in that mashing process, and it honestly takes out about 3 hours on brew day. So you can pick from those two things. So one other note about the brewing process is I'm gonna be using a brew in a bag method, which has become extremely popular recently with home brewers, mainly because you're skipping the entire sparging process, which is this entire filtering process, kind of complicated, takes a little longer, and the actual end result is not going to be that much different. So I highly suggest getting one of these brew bags if you are a first-time brewer. They've worked great for me, and that's the technique I'm going to be using in this video. So let's start out on the actual mashing process. And first you got to whip out your brew pot. I've got a 4.5 gallon brew pot. And that's perfect because I'm only making 2.5 gallons of beer, which is about a case of beer, which is plenty for me. Of course, if you want to make 5 gallons, you got to get a bigger brew pot. So you're going to need 4 gallons of water. There's marks on the side of my pot, which makes it super easy. And if you're using tap water, just make sure it's not too chlorinated. I'm using a mix of tap water and filter water. So the reason you're adding an extra 1.5 gallons of water is because of the displacement that's going to happen when you're brewing in the bag, along with the evaporation of when you boil your wort later on in the process. Heat up your water according to your actual recipe. For my IPA, I'm heating it up to 160 degrees. And then I'm going to take my brew bag, which works just like a tea bag. You put it around the edges, and then you start pouring in all of your cracked grains. Make sure you stir your grains around so they don't clump together, because again, you don't want them to clump in flour balls, or you won't extract the maximum amount of sugar from your grains. So the water started at 160 degrees, but because we added all the grains, it's gonna drop down to about 148 degrees. And the goal is to maintain that temperature for 30 minutes. So what I do is I put the lid on and I check it every now and then. I give it a stir to make sure it's not clumping. And if the temperature has dropped too low, if it's dropped by like 10 degrees, just turn the heat on for about a minute to heat it back up to that range, whatever your recipe says. Since there's so much water and all that residual heat, I normally don't have too many issues with keeping a steady temperature. Just keep that lid on, give it a few stirs, and 30 minutes will fly by. After that half hour, the water should completely change colors and the smell is going to be amazing. You've got this sugary, malty barley water. Now, just like a tea bag, take your brew bag, and it's gonna be a little hot so you can wrap a towel around the top, and just pull the brew bag straight from the liquid and let it all drain out. Make sure you don't actually squeeze the bag once you take it out of the liquid. You just wanna let it naturally drain till it stops dripping. You might get an undesirable bitterness if you squeeze the beer, and we're already accounting for all of that displacement, so you don't have to squeeze out any extra liquid. This is now what they call the wort, which is basically your liquid from the mashing process, pretty much just sugary barley water. Another great part about the brew bag process is now you've got your strained out beer there. You don't have to transfer into any other pots. You're ready to boil your beer. And the boiling process is going to destroy all the bacteria in there, so you're basically starting at a blank slate for the yeast to come in and do its fermenting. And also during the boiling process, that's when you're gonna start adding hops for flavor. Now, hops are a magical flower, and when you smell them, you instantly understand why hoppy beers like IPAs have such a distinct, tasty flavor. And there are a ton of different varieties of hops. They come in pellet form for convenience. Since I'm going for a more tropical vibe with my beer, the hops that we're adding have a ton of natural citrus tones, which should pair perfectly with the mango. When you add your hops at the beginning of the boiling process, you're gonna get more bitterness because you're boiling the heck out of a flower, so it's gonna taste a little bitter. When you add them towards the end, you're gonna get more aroma, and then there's a dry hopping process, which we'll get into later. The IPA that I'm making uses both techniques for adding hops. So first, I am going to bring my wort up to a boil, get it at a nice rapid boil, just like this. And right away, I'm gonna add about ½ an ounce of my hops to the boil for the full 60 minutes. Just make sure you stir the wort every now and then so it doesn't boil over. And then once that hits 45 minutes, I'm gonna add another 0.5 ounces of hops, and then I'm gonna boil that for another 15 minutes. Once the 60 minutes of boiling has finished, I'm gonna turn the heat off, and then I'm gonna add 1.5 more ounces of hops. Now we've got to cool the wort down to room temperature, because if you add yeast to hot water, you will destroy it. And there are a million different techniques to cooling your actual wort. I'm going to use probably the most low-tech method, which is basically taking your wort, putting it in the sink, and filling up your sink with cold water. That cold water is going to start to lower the temperature of the beer. Once the outside temperature is really warm, I drain that off, fill it up with more cold water, and then add ice to that water. And then I would say in a ½ hour, you should have room temperature wort. At this point, everything that comes into contact with that wort, other than the yeast, needs to be sanitized, because we've got our blank slate. We don't want to be adding any weird bacteria or something that's going to spoil the beer. First, we're going to sanitize our fermenter. So just follow your instructions on your sanitizer and fill up that fermenter with sanitized water. Once it's all sanitized, you can actually save that sanitizing liquid and pour it into your bottling jug and save that for bottling day. When you pour off your sanitizing liquid, don't worry about the extra bubbles, just keep those there. They're not gonna harm your beer. And then just dump in your wort to your sanitized fermenter. Now you're ready to pitch your yeast, which basically means just add it to the wort. And once that yeast is added, you pretty much have beer. Well, sort of. You gotta wait 2 weeks for that to ferment. Now I'll give your fermenter a few vigorous shakes back and forth, which is gonna oxygenate your wort. So you're gonna hammer on that lid and cool it in a dark place for about 2 weeks. Temperature control is one of the most important parts, and also one of the most difficult parts about home brewing. You want to keep it at a nice regulated temperature, or you could throw off a lot of things in the process. For me, it's about to be summertime and I really don't have much air conditioning in this place. So I actually ordered this brew bag, this refrigerator brew bag, so I can put my entire fermenter in the bag, and I can just switch out some ice packs every now and then, and that should keep it at a nice regulated temperature around 65 to 70 degrees. If you have a really cool basement in your house, you could definitely try a lager. And if you have a really hot house and you've got no way of cooling it, try a saison. This is an optional step, but a lot of beer making kits come with a hydrometer, which is basically a way to measure the sugar levels in your beer, which will ultimately tell you the alcohol levels in your beer. So you can fill up a little container with your beer and take that hydrometer reading. I'm not really gonna get into how to read it, but I will put a link in the description below that will explain everything you need to know. And just remember, if you are trying your beer during the fermentation process, which I suggest you do, you're not gonna have a tasty product in the beginning. It's gonna be a little bitter, it's gonna taste weird in the very start, but the flavors are gonna develop and it's gonna get better. But even after 2 weeks, when it's done fermenting, you still have warm, flat beer. So don't get discouraged if it's not perfect. The end product, once it's carbonated, is gonna be light years tastier than what you have there. You might have seen the term dry hopping on a beer label, and what that basically means is adding hops to the fermenting process, not actually cooking the hops in the boiling process. My IPA has a dry hopping process, so once the beer has fermented for 7 days out of the 14 days total, You're gonna take a muslin bag and make sure that bag is nice and sanitized. You're gonna add another 1.5 ounces of hops, and you're gonna throw that right into the fermenter for the last 7 days. I thought it'd also be a good time to add the mango as well. They say it's best to give the yeast just a few days on its own to develop, then you can start adding the flavorings. It's very crucial that when you're adding any flavorings to beer in the fermenting process, that you do heat those things up so you kill off all the unwanted bacteria. So that's what I did with the mango. I heated it up to 170 degrees. I also froze the mango and thawed it out a few times, and what that does is starts to break down the cell walls, which will release more of that flavor. So I added the mango to a muslin bag, and I let the hops and the mango ferment for another 7 days. So it's been 2 weeks, and the last step I'm gonna do before bottling is put my fermenter into the fridge. And what this is gonna do is chill the beer, and a lot of that sediment and yeast is going to pull down to the bottom, ultimately giving you a cleaner final beer product because it's going to be stuck at the bottom. So when you actually go to bottle the beer, all of the sediment will stick to the bottom. The first thing we're going to do for the bottling process, boil 2 cups of water with our priming sugar to dissolve that up nicely, and your recipe will tell you exactly how much priming sugar you need. The sugar is there to actually carbonate the beer, and the cool part about making beer is you're adding a very specific amount of sugar. So once the yeast eats up the sugars and turns it into CO2, your beer is done carbonating. That's why beers can sit on the shelf forever and not explode. Hopefully not explode. So next, take whatever bottles you have and just make sure you give them a little rinse with some soap. And then we're gonna add in all of that sanitizing liquid that you reserved from the first phase. Your kit should come with a tube that has a liquid release valve to make this process really simple. So once you filled up all your bottles, you can dump out all that sanitizing liquid. And again, don't worry about any of those extra bubbles. Just keep those in there. Don't try to wash those out. Now this is a very important step. We are going to rack the beer into the sanitizing bottling bucket. Make sure you do this very slowly because you're gonna see we did such a good job with getting all of that muck on the bottom. They actually call this the trub, and you want to pour off the liquid so you're leaving a lot of that trub on the bottom so it doesn't get into your final product. Now you can start bottling your beer. Follow the same process as we did with the sanitizing solution. And what I found is if you fill up the bottles completely to the top, once you pull out the actual rod, you'll have the perfect amount of head space for your beer because you do want to leave a little room in your bottles. If you're using bottle caps, make sure your bottle caps are sanitized, and a lot of the kits will also come with a bottle capper, and that is this process. But again, these little pop tops, they work great and it's a much easier process, but make sure these are sanitized as well, the pop tops. Now you're gonna store your beer away for at least 2 weeks, I would say. 2-3 weeks would be on the safe side, and keep that at about 65 to 70 degrees if you can. And then you want to make sure you chill your beer. My recipe says chill it for a week. I mean, that's a pretty deep chill, but make sure you chill your beer for at least a few days before you drink it so it is extra crispy and extra delicious.
We get drunk for this?
All
thing,
right,
boys?
I'm 5 weeks older than when I started this beer. That's how long it took to make this. Is it worth it? I brought over Derek Lucci and then my other friend over here.
My name's Rat Kylie.
Are you actually his brother?
No.
No.
So we're gonna try this, guys. This is a mango mango IPA. So IPA obviously heavy in the hop game. So a lot of hop flavor. And then I tried fruit for the first time. So this has a mango.
Smell it.
And this is the Chris
Smell
name.
what? You smell what?
I smell like mango or something.
Really? Oh.
So IPA stands for International Pancake Association.
Steam.
It's
It's steaming.
In association with IHOP.
Oh, ready?
Don't drink and drive, kids. Even if I have to after this.
Are these both the same? Are they both the same or what's
Ooh,
going on?
wow. Smell that mango. How do you get the mango in there?
This is a party. Here, you can do a little more. Oh.
This smells good.
Oh, it smells, and yeah, it's incredible.
It smells so fruity.
How do you get the mango? I'm sure I could watch the video, but I don't watch.
You'll
YouTube
have to
videos.
watch.
I don't watch YouTube.
Oh, nice.
Ooh,
Crisp.
this is good.
Chris, you know that
Wow. This is really
I'm
good.
not gonna lie, I've tasted one of these. I've already had this weekend. I drank I think
Liar.
2 of them. The hoppiness. It's the first time I went for the full IPA. I've done just the pale ale. It's a little more bitter. It definitely has
it's
more
good,
bitterness.
though. The fruitiness is there.
Would you like squeeze in something into this? Or
You
no?
really want to know how you get the mango?
I'm saying with a beer,
Uh,
would you like squeeze in some orange or something?
You see, that I think would actually do a great job with the bitterness. A little bit of orange. Do I have anything?
I don't know. I think the bitterness is
So,
welcome. I
to,
like bitter.
To answer your question, you'll watch the video.
Okay, this is good. It's funny. Whenever I like taste a homemade beer, I'm expecting it not to taste like beer, and it does. I
Yeah,
don't
this
know
is
why.
good.
It's
Look at the
typically something
carbonation
else.
on this one. This is
To me,
solid
homemade beer,
carbonation.
it tastes incredible, but there's just a freshness that you don't get when you taste regular beer. Unless it's like coming straight from the tap from the brewery. I'm telling you guys, it's really not that hard to make beer. All you got to do is follow the instructions every single time. I've done it 3 times now, and it's worked out perfectly every time. You've tasted, I think,
Yeah.
every beer I've
This
made.
is like the carbonation on this.
It's good.
Yeah.
Is there something different?
No,
The carbonation?
no,
The
it's
fruit,
just-
is that
Maybe,
carbonated
you're
more?
right, you're
I
right.
mean, it's like kombucha.
I
the
think
fruit.
with the fruit, you might get a little extra carbonation.
I like that.
The
I feel
color
like when you're
sense.
making, I love beer. I've always loved beer, but like I don't really drink much these days. So I appreciate like just having a good. Like you don't need much. It's not like you're just pounding
Exactly.
some shitty beer. It's
I
like,
Yeah.
disagree with both of them. If
Well-
I had 5 of these, I would drink all of them.
Josh brings
It's
up a
delicious.
Josh brings up a good point because I don't really drink too much either, and it's not like you have to be some heavy. Although a big part of the beer
Beer
making
culture, you said.
industry,
People
there's a
like
lot
it.
of drinkers, but I don't get drunk. I like drinking a beer every now and then. So this is the perfect way. You make 24 bottles a month. And then, you come back after a long day and you drink one of these, and it's more like drinking just a fresh, soda that gets you a little tipsy, but it's
already
not. I'm not trying to get wasted. So that is something to note. You don't have to be like a huge drinker.
thank you for that beer.
Yeah.
I gotta
thank
go
you.
drive home. I'll see you now. So now drive and drink.
Guys,
Or
try
drink
it
it.
out.
Yeah, it's
Awesome.
delicious.